What's up, guys? Welcome back to episode 3 of Outside the Octagon podcast, OTO, with my co-host, Bannon Crowley.
How's it going today?
And today we're going over UFC 310 that just happened this Saturday. We're going to be covering 311 up next, and then UFC Tampa, the fight night after that. So we have a lot on the slate today. But I'll start off going back to Banning on after a super, super fun card, in my opinion, at 310.
Yeah, this was a very good card to end the year off. We had a lot of good guys coming in here, a lot of prospects, undefeated guys, and we also had a newcomer to the UFC getting a title shot for the first time in a long time. And we'll talk about that first in the main event, Pantoja versus Asakura. And overall in this fight, I know Asakura got finished pretty early, but the pace in this fight was kind of crazy from the start. You could see Pantoja went out there. He had something to prove. He felt disrespected throughout this whole fight, and he went out there. And Dana, I'm sure he wanted to push Asakura, but also, like we talked about last episode, you do want to see your UFC guys go out there and get the win, and that's what happened. And after this, they were asking him who he wanted next. He called out DJ. So potentially a fight to see who maybe the best is all time in the division. I know you're the flyweight guy, so I want to hear you talk about this. And I'm sure you're very happy with Pantoja's defense there, looking very good in this fight.
Yeah, I mean, Pantoja looked great. I think that was a lot of people did have Kai winning. I think you might have been one of them, correct? Yeah,
Mhm.
but I mean, Kai's very good. We all knew that. He did exactly what he was supposed to. People knew about his lack of grappling, but Pantoja deserved that win in my book, his third title defense in a row. And he's still been one of the most disrespected champs. He's a pound for pound top 10 guy. I think you can't even debate with it anymore after this defense. And it was interesting to me after the fight, they asked him his own flyweight rankings, and he had Henry Cejudo above him and DJ ahead of him, which I think is maybe being humble, but Pantoja, in my opinion, is I would have him at number 2 right now. And DJ is the flyweight goat, in my opinion. Like he's the one that really brought the division to life in the UFC. But that being said, the main argument against him is the division was brand new. He fought cans. But to his credit, something I respect a lot that we don't see as much anymore is guys defending their division. It used to be guys like Jose Aldo. You stay in your division and you defend it against everyone that comes in your way. Anderson Silva. And that, in my opinion, is the best thing for the UFC. Obviously, guys want to switch around, get the big money fights. But you got to, I think the best thing you can do for your legacy is defend your belt and go out on top. And Pantoja has cleared the division. He's 10-0 against the ranked flyweights right now. He's dominated everyone that comes in his way in the last like 5 years or so. So I think DJ is the flyweight goat, not the UFC goat. But he did fight cans. It is a fact. His resume got good at the end before he moved to one, obviously, in that trade. But I just, in my opinion, Pantoja's too. But I would 100% say he has time. Even though he's 35, 36 now, I 100% think he has time to move up to become the flyweight goat.
Yeah, I do want to ask you too, talking about this fight, overall, obviously a great performance, but I do think that Asakura, we saw some decent things from him during this fight. I know he got finished in the second round, and most of the time you would say, oh, that just doesn't look like it's fair of a fight, and he kind of got whooped in that fight, but he did have some good moments in there, some of those knees too, landing. I thought that first one was going to take out Pantoja, but then obviously going down to the ground as well. And obviously, that's one thing that he has to work on as well, that ground defense, especially against a guy like Pantoja, who has so many finishes while he's on his back, getting those rear naked chokes as well. But for this fight, too, especially next, for Pantoja, I think we could both agree that whether we want to see the fight or not, it seems like Royval is the guy who's going to get the next opportunity. He earned that within his last fight. I guess we'll have to see what happens because I don't think DJ already said he's not coming back. But what I'm getting at here, what do you think is next for Kai Asakura? Because I personally think he can definitely have a good run in the UFC. He's still more relatively young at this point. He's not up there at 36 years old. I'm pretty sure he's 31 right now. I could be wrong, But yeah, he's 31 right now. So I still think that he's kind of maybe just entering his prime. Do you think he should move up, or do you think he should stay down and fight maybe a contender at this point?
Yeah, so I'll go over Pantoja and Asakura, who I think they should fight next. And I'll start with Kai. Obviously, debuting fight. He was one of the only guys ever to debut in the title fight. It really, I mean, I don't think his stock is too far down after losing the belt in his debut, but it does suck for him. There's no doubt about that. It could have been maybe Tatsuro Taira right away in Japan, even UFC Japan. That would have been great. But he still has a ton of options. Obviously, the story of the week was he's the bantamweight champ. He had this weight cut. He looked very shredded, very lean. Apparently, he gained all the weight back, 10 plus pounds instantly. But the fight week, he was very exciting. Even with his lack of English, they kind of left him out to dry in the press conference. But he's an exciting guy. You can tell, even if you don't speak his language, you can understand why people like him, his energy, his excitement. So for Kai, I would stay at flyweight actually. Bantamweight, that might be his home division, maybe even later. I think he's 31 right now. He has plenty of time if he stays in the UFC. I would like to see him do that later, move up if the weight cuts become harder and harder. But right now, while he can, I had one name on my mind for I think lines up perfectly is Manel Kopp for the trilogy fight. This is a guy who lost some UFC buzz in the last few years, but if you don't know, him and Asakura had a pretty big rivalry in Ryzen. It was maybe his biggest rival where they split the series. They both beat each other. Manel Kopp is fighting on 3/11, I believe, if not the Tampa fight night. He's fighting the next month or so. So if they want to give Asakura a few months, give Manel Kopp a few months, hopefully, and they agree to this fight, I think that's the perfect fight. I would even maybe you put it on a main card of a pay-per-view. I would love to see it as a headliner, maybe something like that on a fight night. I think that would be awesome to get their star power up because Manel Kopp can rebound it. He was a maybe a bigger talent in Japan than he was in the UFC, but his stock is way down. Asakura needs a big fight. That would be awesome. They have history. And then moving to Pantoja, yeah, he's really cleared out the division. He's almost entirely done so, but not completely. Obviously, you mentioned Royval. And there's been that same cycle of flyweights, Moreno, Royval. But the other name that I feel like people are forgetting, I would like to see this personally. If you're leaving 125, I could see him fighting Figgy maybe. Get their rivalry back on track. Ever since Figgy moved up, it's been I feel like people almost forgot about Figgy was one of those guys at flyweights that had a very dominating run. He's coming off a loss against Peter Yan, but he's done an incredible at bantamweight. So in my opinion, I would think I'd rather have Figgy than Royval, but I think someone I would really like is Kai Kara France. I think needs one more. He's really only on a one fight win streak after Urseg. I think he's so close for the belt, and I would always reward activity. So I think maybe you do Figgy, but I'd like to see Pantoja fight KKF, someone he hasn't fought yet, uh, in flyweight, and then after that, I would say he definitely cleared the division out. So, any words on that for flyweight?
Yeah, I mean, I like your idea with Cape there, for Asakura. I do think it really depends on if Cape wins. He's fighting this weekend, in Tampa, going up against Bruno Silva. If he loses to Bruno Silva, it's going to be not great for him. But I do think another guy who I could throw out there, which I think would be maybe more of a layup, but is higher ranked up, is Alex Perez right now, who's currently ranked 6. But this guy is 1-4 in his last 5 fights. How he's still ranked 6th, I don't really know, in my opinion. I mean, throughout his past few fights, he did lose to Tatsuro Taira earlier this year. I'm pretty sure he got injured in that fight. It looked like he did when his knee almost broke in half. So I don't know how long he'll be out for. He did have a win before that earlier this year, but then losing 3 straight fights before that against Figgy, against Pantoja, and then against Makayev, who's not even in the UFC anymore. So if that tells you anything. But I think Asakura, that would be a good fight for him, get him back up there. I do think we both agree we want to see that Tatsuro Taira fight. But I really think if we could build this up, either if Pantoja decides to leave the division, maybe if he runs through it at some point and decides to go up, I don't know, we'll see, or he just loses the belt. I do think we definitely could get that Tatsuro Taira versus Asakura championship fight one day. And Hopefully, but if not, I do think we can get that at some point. I would save that for a little bit, because maybe one of those guys could get up to the championship fight soon. But I would say Alex Perez right now is, in my opinion, he doesn't have a fight upcoming. I guess it depends on how long he's going to be out for, but I'm assuming Asakura is not going to come around and fight very soon. But within the next maybe 4 to 5 months, I guess we'll have to see how far Perez is. And I think, like I said, I think Royval in that last fight has proven that he's the number one contender, whether I want to see that fight or not. Um, in the end, I think he does deserve that fight. I would like to see Kai Kara France go out there and get a title fight soon. Like you said, I think he could be one away since he really is only on that one fight winning streak. He lost the two before that, but obviously such a dominant performance against Urseg. And I would like to see that. I'm a big fan of him as well. So that's what I would like to see right now. But also moving out to another division in the co-main event, which we saw probably the deepest division right now. There's so many good guys that we've been talking about. And last week, we really stressed that this fight would really be the future of the division because there's so many guys holding up the top, but there's so many great prospects in here. Ian Gary versus Shavkat was the fight that I think many people didn't expect. They didn't think that Ian Gary was going to be able to hold his own. I think we both expected Gary to perform a lot better than other people did. I know you predicted him to win this fight, and it was very close. I mean, 3-2 in that fight. The first 2 rounds where his shorts got ripped because he was being hugged against the wall for a little while. We can talk about that a little bit, but those last 3 rounds very close. And Ian Gary having the opportunity to get a submission in that 5th round. I'm not going to go in there and be like DC and say it's locked in half a second in when he gets the anywhere near the neck, but he did have an opportunity there as well. So talking about Gary's performance and just overall how you felt about this fight as well.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like DC and Rogan both, the second they can think of a submission that's happening, they say it's locked in. And it looked like I might have to watch it back, but it looked to me like Gary never really had the second arm in to lock the choke in, but he definitely had it under the chin. Shafkat definitely looked stressed there, but I mean, that would have been incredible if he could have submitted Shafkat. That would have really put a staple on the fight and Gary's name for the division. He definitely would have got the title shot, and he'd probably be the most hyped guy in the division. Choking out the boogeyman in his own game would have been great for him. But Ian Gary definitely surprised people. We both mentioned it, but he gets a lot of hate because of his off the octagon antics, outside the octagon antics, OTO. But I mean, I don't know if it was his PR or whatever, but through the embeddeds, through the fight week, he seemed a lot more likable. It seemed like it's something they're working on. And I think he's building up momentum here from fans, from the media, from other fighters. And I think it showed after that performance too. He said it himself, but his stock did not lower at all. I mean, he's been outstruck before. MVP was faster than him on the feet. He's been dropped before by unranked guys like Song, and he was they both went back and forth, but Shafkat was holding him, grabbing him under the pants a little bit, because I think he didn't want to strike with him. He really didn't want that to happen, and that was at least what I predicted. Ian Gary's path to success is just wait outside and just piece up Shafkat the entire time, just try and be boring, be a point fighter. But it was working for him. And then I was so shocked by his takedown defense. It was like incredible in my opinion. He defended everything so well. He had a short training. He was training full Muay Thai for Buckley, a complete opposite guy to Shafkat, just a straight power puncher, like no grappling at all. And it seemed like he transitioned very well, even with the shorter camp with Chute Box in Brazil. But he looked incredible. I think that puts his stock. I have him above Shafkat, even though he just lost against him. I think stock wise, as a prospect, we've both talked about all these guys, whether it's Prades, Morales, like even Buckley, Gary, Shafkat, all these prospects coming up at welterweight. I think Gary's the best one right now. And the loss might go on his record. He's not undefeated, but I think his performance proved it that he's that top guy now. But so before I go back to you, I'll ask you, do you think it seems like Shavkat versus Bilal is next? And after that fight, I feel a lot better about I'm switching my prediction. I think Bilal might be a better wrestler, and overall he might win that fight against Shavkat. Where before this I thought he had no chance.
Yeah, so originally, I never got to put this video out, obviously, because the fight did end up changing. But when I was going to watch Shavkat versus Bilal in the first instance, when this was going to happen this weekend, my original prediction, despite me not loving Bilal, is I did think he was going to go out there and beat Shavkat. I think he would beat that version of Shavkat we saw this weekend. I know there was some talk about him going in there, obviously, with, I believe he said a torn MCL or something like that, which it always kind of sucks to see after the fight, win or loss, because loss, I think either way, I don't want to take away from anything that Ian Gary did, and I do feel like it's kind of unfair. Obviously, you have to disclose those injuries as well after, but I don't want people to take away Ian Gary's performance because Shavkat maybe was a little banged up going into that fight. I do think Bilal, if he fights the way that he did against Leon, going against Shavkat and bringing that pressure to Shavkat, especially with what we saw from Ian Gary. When Ian Gary was on the outside piecing him up, he was doing very well. And that, like you said, that was his path to a win if he was able to win. Shavkat saw some success holding him up against the wall, like I said before. But if Bilal brings that pressure to Shavkat, I don't know if he has the gas tank to go 5 rounds. We saw them go 5 rounds in this fight, but let's not act like both of them were going 100% throughout this fight. Obviously, they were trying to hurt each other, but it's not like there were a lot of moments where we saw a little bit of a standoff because neither guy wanted to take that risk. Bilal's going to go out there and he's going to bull rush him, and I do think that he's probably the better wrestler. I think it's going to be very close. And I do think, as of right now, I do think Bilal would probably beat Shavkat, which I know a lot of people will be upset about because I know, like I talked about before, the Aura Merchant. I do think he does deserve the title fight now. I kind of stressed that in the last video that we did. I thought that he was a little undeserving of the title coming off of that Wonder Boy win, but now beating Ian Gary. Another thing I want to talk about too, before I bring it back to you, I think we can both agree Ian Gary's not the seventh best in this division. He is a lot higher than that. So with that being said, even though he lost this fight and he's at 7, I think we both could agree he's not going to get bumped down in the rankings this week. Who do you think he should fight next? Because if we have Shavkat versus Bilal, who do you think is next for Ian Gary after that great performance?
Yeah, it's tough for Gary. Obviously, he would like to win, and bringing it back, where before when Bilal was originally supposed to defend his belt, it seemed like the UFC was kind of like he was defending it very fast. He wants people to remember his name. The security didn't know him going into the Octagon. He's kind of been getting clowned on, and I do feel for him honestly that the UFC really doesn't seem like they even like him either. It might be that lack of finishes, but in my opinion, the Leon fight, I was a hater before then. I'll say I
Mhm.
thought he was a boring guy like Evlaev or Merab, where it's just like position grappling, no submissions, no damage. But the Leon fight, he dominated Leon, who's supposed to be a better wrestler now too. So I like Bilal, and I think it does seem like they're rushing him out. So starting with that, it's a tough spot for Gary because I think they're going to give Bilal a fight soon. I think the toe injury is healing up roughly soon, probably, this summer maybe. But then you go through the division. It's already UFC London is in March, I believe. And that's Leon, and I believe Sean Brady is most likely the opponent there. And then it seems like JDM is going to fight at 312 in Australia. So it's like Colby's fighting right now. These names are kind of getting taken out every single spot. And Ian Gary has, I mean, respect to him for taking the Shavkat fight. So he seems like the guy that will take fights that don't necessarily protect his record or his rankings. But I just wouldn't, I think at this point you can't fight down at all for Ian Gary. So it is a tough spot. I'd love to see him fight Usman, but who knows with Usman? It seemed like he's been rejecting names recently. Maybe his knees are still bad. And that's really tough in welterweight. I think honestly the best bet for Gary might just be sit out and wait a little bit because Bilal might be. I'm gonna guess he's gonna defend it very soon against Shafkat. I'm gonna guess they're gonna push that fight. So I don't want him. Yeah, the only name I can really think of would be Usman, but I can't imagine Usman would even take the fight right now. He'd probably wait. So kind of a non-answer, but maybe if you're Gary, you just wait out, work on that training. You know you're good enough now. I love his attitude that he has a lot of faith in himself. Maybe he was a little too much like McGregor at first, but now it seems like he kept the self confidence, got rid of the kind of cocky attitude. So I guess I'll bring it back to you because I gave a non answer. But if I'm me and Gary, I'm waiting out a few months, bringing out my game now that I know I'm probably the best guy in the division for the belt.
Yeah, like you said, I think Leon's pretty locked up at that point. And he said, as we know today, he came out and he was talking to Ariel Helwani, Ian Gary did, and he said if he's going to fight in Europe, he's going to fight in Dublin. He's not going to fight in the U. He's not going to fight in England, I guess. If he's going to fight,
UK,
well, in
UK.
the UK. I'm getting mixed up with all the words, but it does seem like JDM, from what we know, is going to be fighting in Australia, and it seems like he's going to be going up against Carlos Prates, maybe. That's been the fight that's been discussed, so that'll be an interesting one as well. I do think for Ian Gary, the timeline works perfectly. I think you have him fight the winner of Covington versus Buckley, because either way, whoever wins this fight, Covington, I mean, that fight writes itself, obviously. Ian Gary and Covington, that's been a fight that's been talked about for a year now. And then if Buckley wins, which we can talk about later in the prediction, this was the fight that was supposed to happen. And then honestly, Ian Gary versus Buckley, the winner, depending on who wins between Shavkat and Bilal, storyline wise, obviously, Shavkat versus Ian Gary again, another rematch for the belt. But either way, that might be almost a number one contender fight, because assuming that Buckley goes out there and beats Covington, I'm assuming Ian Gary is going to move up in the rankings as well soon, especially depending on what happens with Edwards and Sean Brady and all the other guys up there as well. I think Ian Gary fights the winner of Buckley versus Covington, and that could be close to at least a top 7 matchup as we see right now, since Covington is 6 and Gary is 7. But assuming Buckley wins, I'm assuming that he'll move up close to the top 5 as well, since Sean Brady and JDM share a 4th ranked right now for some weird reason as well. But I mean, talking besides these guys, we talked about it a little bit, the future of this division. I first want to ask you, I guess, going into this next fight, since you do have Bilal winning, maybe not officially right now, but you are kind of leaning towards him against Shavkat. How long do you think he will be able to defend the belt after Shavkat? And as well, we can talk about maybe some other guys that may contend for the belt within the next few years as well, who may not be within those top rankings right now.
Yeah, and I mean Bilal's straight up good. Like he's overhated. It's just a fact. And I don't remember the exact card number. It might have been around 280, 279, where when Bilal finished Sean Brady, Sean Brady was an undefeated prospect at that point. I had him beating Bilal. Bilal was just known as the boring guy that never finishes fights. And then he did. And then he won again. And then he won the belt. So yeah, right now, I guess unofficially a lot can happen until their fight in the summer, hopefully. But I would have Bilal winning. And I'll say also, Shafkat, he did look a little gassed against Gary. Like, he didn't look well rounded for a 5 round fight. And Bilal's a guy that against Leon, he just dominated and he took advantage. And Leon was getting more and more tired and discouraged, and Bilal looked to get stronger and stronger. So it will still be a close fight. It's not like, Shafkat won. We can remember that. He just won the fight against Ian Gary. But it will be a good fight either way. But Bilal is on the slightly older, I think he's 35, 36 maybe now. He's not as young as these other guys like Gary and Shavkat. But I'd like to see him fight. If the UFC wants to push him out of there, and he's going to be very active, I'd love to see that because I really, he is very talented at what he does. It's like Colby Covington, where Colby kind of abuses his cardio wrestling, but that's a valid tactic. If that's how you're going to win fights, that's how you win them. So Bilal did it against Leon. He just dominated on the ground. And welterweight, it's kind of welterweight from probably 15 to like 3 or 4. It's really, I don't think it should be ranked that far apart. It's like, it seems like the entire welterweight division is like a fight away from passing each other, from 3 all the way down to 15. So it's in a really fun spot right now. And a few more fights this winter, I think will kind of spread out who the real contenders are. So for Bilal, like, let's say he beats Shavkat, it might be a guy like JDM who's about to win. It could be if Sean Brady wins. You could even see a Leon rematch, which I wouldn't want to see personally if Leon wins his fight after London. But I think someone like Usman needs to get back in contention. He's at that age, at that health, that he can't be waiting around this long. I know he probably wants to feel 100% because he is fighting huge fights and he's lost before because he took him on short notice, like against Kamaev. So maybe, in my opinion, I'd like to see Usman wait out. Bilal fight Shavkat in the summer, and then maybe in the fall, winter, you have Usman, a fully rested, fully healed Usman, for kind of a do or die fight where if he loses, maybe he retires.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with a lot of that too. Like we said, there's a lot of guys towards the top that may be holding things up a little bit. I think there are some other guys I want to highlight, especially going towards the future as well. A guy that fought on this card, Brian Battle. I was a little disappointed with his performance, but he did go out there. He did get the win in the end and has had a pretty decent year so far. The first fight this year, his no contest was a very bad no contest, in my opinion. That's where I became a fan of him watching that fight. And he said he wanted to keep going. He wanted to keep fighting. He was definitely did not like that no contest. He came out, he won the next two fights that he fought this year. Another guy right now who actually just won a belt in another organization who maybe we'll see come over at some point, only 30 years old, is Shamil Masayev, Makai, all these Russian names, probably mispronouncing them, but he's undefeated to this point, one draw. So that would be interesting if he would come over. Michael Morales is a guy who's very underrated, a very, very good prospect. And after beating Neil Magny, as we know, Neil Magny is the stepping stone in this division right now. If you want to go and get a title fight, just ask almost anyone that's at the top of this division right now. Obviously, Carlos Prates as well. He's been great in the UFC. So there's a lot of great guys looking towards the future as well in this division. And I think there's a very bright future going forward as well. Talking about another division that may not have as bright of a future, especially after we just saw the second versus third ranked guys in the division fight this weekend with a potential robbery of the ages going on between Gon and Volkov in their rematch. This is a very interesting spot because we just saw this fight happen and Cyril Gane comes away with the win on the scorecards, and officially going forward, he was the winner of this fight. So in any other sense, we would probably say if the second ranked guy just won the fight, he should get the next title fight. But as we know, this whole division is very, very interesting right now. So what would you say is next for either of these guys going forward because of the state of this division?
Yeah, I mean, it's in a terrible spot right now. And like Tom Aspinall, does he have the belt? Who knows? It's not even an interim belt to me anymore. Like John Jones has his own belt. He has like the John Jones belt, and
Hmm.
he's gonna fight whoever he wants in any division, you know? And that's no disrespect to John Jones, but I just don't think he's gonna defend it. Let's say just tied to Ivasa somehow gets off the five-fight skid. John Jones would never fight him to defend his belt. That is just not happening. I think he wants these big fights, these big money fights before he retires. So even Jones mentioned it before. He would relinquish the belt just to fight like guys like Pereira, big money fights. Personally, I would like to see that. I mean, obviously Jones Aspinall is the fight everyone's been begging for, but Aspinall, I guess he's the paper champion right now. But when you look at the statistically or strategically at heavyweight, he is the champ that people should be aiming for. And I'm not going to say the fight was rigged of Gane and Volkov, but it seems kind of interesting to me that Volkov was dominated by Aspinall not too long ago at UFC London, and then Gon's the guy on paper to fight Aspinall. He's that next guy that has the perfect style against him, and he somehow scrapes out that division. Kind of interesting in my opinion, but it's in a really tough spot because he Aspinall beat Blades. He proved that it wasn't a fluke. Pavlovich was destroyed by Volkov, and when you look at the heavyweight division as a whole, the only like promising guy is like his fellow Englishman like Mick Parkin at like 15 or 14 maybe. Like it's really just terrible. Like Tai Tuivasa, we've talked about this every week. It seems like how is he ranked still? I mean, I don't know if they need to sign more heavyweights, if they need to just rank some unranked heavyweights or what, but it's a little ridiculous. So Volkov, I mean, looked great. It was pretty similar to that first fight in terms of how they're of how the battle went, of who's winning it, where this one kind of seemed like they both split the first and second fight from standing up to the ground game more. Apparently Gon broke his foot or his toes, but Gon didn't impress me at all. I think you lost the fight on decision. I would like to see Volkov Aspinall. I'd be fine with that if he had won the fight. After the first one, Volkov has gotten a lot better. He destroyed Pavlovich. It's just a shame for Aspinall and Volkov that it's not really going their way right now. I don't know if it's up to Dana White, but they need to fix heavyweight. So for me, I think you have to give Gon the Aspinall fight. He won the fight. I think that's a very fun matchup. Aspinall's hardest opponent yet, I'd say. Gon is very thick, and he doesn't overexert himself. He's not an amazing striker, but he's kind of short, not short, but like stocky frame that can defend himself. Where Aspinall likes to swing heavily and fast and drop these big, kind of fat heavyweights. So Gon seems like the perfect counter opponent. And if Aspinall does beat Gon, you have to give him Jones, obviously. But so in my opinion, Aspinall is the champ right now. Gon's the number one contender. He just won the contender fight. So I think that's a very exciting fight, but I wish we didn't have to be in this spot.
Yeah, I think right now, if we're under the assumption that John Jones and Aspinall is next, which it kind of seems like maybe that's what's going to happen because both of them are training. John Jones wants to fight. Assuming that happens, I think you just have Gon and Volkov fight again, honestly, after that fight. I mean, realistically, what else are you going to do? Neither of them can fight down in the rankings because it just doesn't make sense. As we know, we've seen most of these matchups so far, and really the only guy that I see that I would be intrigued by is Jailton Almeida because he's really the only guy that I find a little exciting in this division. Like we said, Tai Tuivasa ranked 11th right now. That would not happen in any other division on that streak that he's on right now. So yeah, this division just not great overall. And assuming John Jones versus Aspinall is next, which I don't understand how Tom Aspinall is still the interim champion because once John Jones fights and defends the belt, there is no interim anymore. So there's no undisputed champion. It's a very disputed champion. And maybe this is one of those WWE storylines that we see right now. Maybe bringing it back to 2011, I think, when John Cena and CM Punk fought, and CM Punk won the belt and left the company. This is what we're looking at right now. There's two
So
champions.
you're saying that CM Punk should fight heavyweight John Jones right now?
I
I think
think
that's what I'm
I think
hearing.
if he came back, that would be the fight to make. Or we see John Jones versus Waldo Cortez Acosta. That would be another great fight to see as well. John Jones wants the money fight. Something will happen eventually, but I think as of right now, just make Gon and Volkov fight again. And because Volkov got absolutely robbed in that fight. Um, I don't like, we've talked about this before. There's a difference between a robbery and a close fight. I don't think that was particularly close. And I think every single person in the arena knew that Volkov won and Gon walked out of the octagon. So I think that says more than anything else that you could look at from this whole card itself is that fight definitely not a great look for the UFC overall and for this heavyweight division. Talking about another guy that probably didn't make Dana White too happy is Bryce Mitchell versus Royce Gracie in this fight. Bryce Mitchell knocked him out with the Alabama Slamma power bomb and then gave him a big elbow. I'm pretty sure Gracie was knocked out when he gave him that power bomb anyway, but that elbow really put him asleep. We can talk about the future of Bryce Mitchell. This one seems a little bit easier because another guy who won on this card called him out. We can maybe link these two together if you just want to talk about it all as one to make it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But I do think we could both agree that Gracie done in the UFC. Dana White was asked about it after, and he seemed very upset And he didn't really want to talk about it. When someone asked him what was next for Gracie, he really brushed by the question and didn't want to answer it because who is he going to fight? I don't think Gracie should have been on this card. If they were going to fight, they should have been on the prelims or something else. So overall, as well, we can bring in Doohoo Choi, who went out there and had a great performance. Just ran through Nate the Train in that fight, and I think this is the fight next. I guess to put it together, he called out Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell said he wants to fight him. I think that's a very easy decision for the UFC. Both guys won in back-to-back fights too, so I think that could probably be the next fight that they make. I'd be very surprised if it wasn't.
Yeah, so I'll start. Yeah, we can go through both, and I'll start with Bryce Mitchell. I'm a huge fan of the guy. And I mean, Kron Gracie, like everyone knew this was fraudulent. People talk about like bias in the UFC, like as Tony Ferguson would say, like Dana White privilege. Uh, Kron Gracie, like how I mean, only based off his last name is he possibly fighting against a ranked Bryce Mitchell. It like on the main card at that. Let's say he somehow wins that fight. I mean, do you rank Kron Gracie? Like, it just seems ridiculous in my opinion that that fight even happened. But I'm happy Bryce Mitchell won. Happy he got an elbow to the head. Kron Gracie also a flat earther. They both are, which is crazy to me. But I think Choi used that to his advantage, posting the globe on his Instagram for the call out. That's a sweet call out. And Choi's a guy where he's a UFC Hall of Famer already. He's had not legendary. He's had one legendary UFC career, and he's starting a second right now. He had mandatory military service in Korea. He broke his arm. I think it was a 4-year layoff, and he's undefeated since he's came back. I can't think of many more fighters who have done that where they've had such a huge layoff and restarted a second career this well. Nate Landwehr had a ton of momentum. He was probably one fight away from the bottom of the rankings at featherweight. So Choi's perfect for Mitchell, in my opinion, because Choi is a ton of steam, a ton of hype. He has a ton of fans too from that Cub Swanson fight years ago. Yeah, he's a Hall of Famer, as I mentioned. So it would be a super fun fight. Both of them are pretty notable featherweights, even though they're kind of lower in the rankings or unranked like Choi is. But Landwehr, I picked him. He had a ton of momentum going into it, and Choi completely dominated. It wasn't a slugfest like people thought. Choi strategically picked him apart. He looked incredible in every part of the game. So I think the Mitchell call out is perfect. I don't know if Mitchell will move up far in the rankings after beating a bum to put it slightly, but Kron Gracie, what's next for him is death sentence in street fights. I'll do that matchmaking right now. But for Mitchell, he's probably going to be 12 or 13 still, and then Choi can finally get a shot to go back in the rankings. I think that'd be a banger fight. Choi showed off some grappling. We all know he has great striking, so that would be a very fun fight.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about that fight, I didn't even remember his name. I was calling him Hoist Gracie the whole time because I couldn't even remember what his name was. So yeah, get him off the card. Get him out of the company at this point. He should not be back in there. Bryce Mitchell's a good fighter, but he dominated him. He proved a point. He went to the ground with him to prove a point, and he just dominated him in all aspects. And I think that would be another great fight to see going forward as well. And moving on to what we'll see this weekend as of this recording is UFC Fight Night Tampa. As we know, we talked about it a little bit before, how we're going to have a main event, which will help give us a better picture of the division going forward between Colby Covington and Buckley as well. And another guy we talked about as well, Cape on this card. A few other guys of notable names on here as well that we can talk about. But is there any other fights specifically before we get into this main event that you really want to talk about? Any specific people, maybe Miranda Maverick or anyone else?
It won't be Maverick, but I do have some names in mind. But one fight on the prelims, Joel Alvarez versus Dakar Close. If you haven't seen Joel Alvarez, watch him fight. He's a lightweight, but I believe he's 6'3". He is so good. It's like if Tapuria had all the same power but was half a foot taller. He's incredible to watch. He has crazy power. His last fight, he just has insane one punch knockout power. He fights so arrogant, just like Topuria, in my opinion, a fellow Spanish fighter. So that would be a very fun fight. Alvarez is and close. Both of them are very good in the UFC. I think there's one loss or two combined from both of them. I'd say they're both technically prospects still. And this is a fight where we might see, it's kind of like Choi Lan, where they're both right below the rankings. We could see a big KO. Who knows? It could be like the Choi fight. But if Alvarez does win this fight, I think he has the momentum and the hype now to kind of start looking into these rankings. But yeah, that was the main fight I'm looking forward to on the card, I'd say. Some people like Navajo Sterling a lot, seems to be a big name, but I'm not too convinced on him yet. But Joel Alvarez is a name that I'd watch out for on the prelims.
Yeah, a guy you just talked about in Sterling coming over. This is his first fight within the UFC, I believe. So that'll be interesting to see, especially at light heavyweight, where there are some decent guys, but coming into this fight as a pretty heavy favorite at -500 right now at only 27 years old. It'll be interesting to see him go out there. He does. I mean, as we know, the UFC, if you're 6'4", you have a very, very good chance of becoming a very good fighter. That seems like the perfect build. Some other guys on this card too that I think will be interesting to see, a guy like Miles Johns, who at bantamweight, he's kind of closer to getting towards the rankings right now. I think maybe a few more fights he could go out there and maybe be within the rankings. I think he's probably close to that top 30 area right now within the rankings. And the one thing I'm more interested about is the Cub Swanson co-main event. Very interested to know why this was chosen as the co-main event. Um, at 41 years old, Cub Swanson coming in to fight. I know he's a little bit of a bigger name, I guess, in the UFC, and I guess I understand why they're bringing him in, but the co-main event does seem a little weird for him at this point, and I don't really know what's going to happen. Assuming that if he does lose, then he's probably done for, it seems like, at this point, losing twice this year at 41 years old. He hasn't had a great track record throughout the past few years. I mean, every single fight he wins, loses, wins, loses, wins, loses. So he can't really get on a run at this point. But I guess we can move on to the main event now between Buckley and Covington. I do expect Buckley to go out here and get the win. I do think he has been slightly overrated after that last fight that we've seen. I do think people may be giving him, not that he doesn't deserve the credit, but he is definitely, I think it is interesting how much credit he's been given, which I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it, like I said, but it's become this really weird thing that whoever beats Stephen Thompson just gets glazed a little too much, in my opinion, which we saw with Shavkat obviously before. But Buckley did look very good, and I do think that Colby Covington, depending on how he wants to take this fight, if he wants to just go out there and wrestle Buckley the whole time, it won't be entertaining, but Covington does have a chance to win. I don't think Buckley is going to go out there and absolutely destroy him, because I think Covington's smart enough to know he's not just going to stand up there the whole time and wait to get knocked out. But I am very excited to see this. I do think Buckley has a good future in this division, as we've seen so far on his current run. But I do think it may be a little closer than some people expect.
Yeah, it seems like a typical matchup of on the younger side, moving up the rankings, Buckley against a older, moving down, very hated guy. So it's going to be the odds and the picks, general consensus on the fight is going to be overinflated against Colby Covington. I cannot stand Colby Covington as a person and as a fighter. I mean, I like his wrestling style. I just think he's not good. He got very lucky with the way welterweight turned out for him. He fought guys when they weren't good and that or on their decline, and then he got dominated by guys who were genuinely good at the top of the division. So he won that interim belt. He's only like two or three fights away from that. He fights like once a year, but I'm just really not a huge fan of Colby at all. But yeah, Stephen Thompson, Buckley's last opponent, has kind of turned into, sadly, a Neil Magny type role, a gatekeeper role. He went from that like explosive Wonder Boy karate guy, but it's unfortunate, but it does happen with age. He is like 42, I believe. But I completely agree. Buckley is a little overrated. I first knew him from getting brutally knocked out by Kevin Holland in his UFC debut, but he's definitely recovered. Just physique wise alone, and his power punches, like he looks like a force in the octagon. He looks scary. I think that's going to be a big part. But when you compare him to Colby, like it's the typical matchup of a younger power puncher, and then Colby's cardio wrestling that he abuses. So I think it's going to come down to Colby's effort against Leon. I don't think I took him, but I thought it was going to be a pretty close fight before the fight, and it was a pathetic effort. He whined months afterward. His foot was broken. I don't believe it because I don't think he landed a shot the entire strike with his foot. But uh, Kobe's going to do better than people are saying. I'm still not convinced on who I'm picking yet. I would say it's that close. Kobe's still very talented. He's just not at that level that people kind of think he is. And his mouth, I think it was Kamaev that said it, that his the way he talks kind of makes people think he's better than he is, and it's very true. I think Kobe, or he said it himself. That's how he didn't get cut. It really all connects here, but I'd have to look more into it to make an official pick. But I actually do like Colby's chances wrestling wise. He's going to be scared of that power for sure. He's got his jaw broken before by Usman. Buckley's 100% going to look for a huge KO. He needs a huge KO, and he'll want it to get his name out there. He's right below that second tier of contenders at welterweight. The Ian Gary, the Shavkats, the JDMs. I think he's moving up fast, but I think a huge win over Colby could do wonders for Buckley's career in the future. And we very well might see that.
Yeah, talking about some of the guys who we just talked about, going through those careers, and now that we're officially done with the 2024 UFC season, I guess we can say, year after this week, we have a very good card to start the year, which a lot of the time, sometimes that's not the case because we get very good cards to end the year. So we're kind of out towards the beginning of the year. But because we saw so many guys maybe take some time off, and also maybe the UFC wanting to rush a certain champion out on this card as well, we can talk about UFC 311, which is pretty much done to this point. As we, unless some things change, this is a pretty stacked card so far. Hopefully nothing gets pulled out. We have seen some fights like Eileen Perez, who got moved onto this card, which we're very excited to watch her perform inside of the Octagon as well as outside of the Octagon as well. Very good performer in all those senses. Some very good guys on this card as well, which I want to highlight. Zach Reese, who's one of my favorite prospects right now. His last fight, very entertaining. And Peyton Talbot as well, another guy who's got a lot of credit recently. Another guy as well, Jailton Almeida. He's moved past that prospect area, and this could really solidify himself as a contender in the division. As we know, heavyweight isn't that great so far. And obviously, as you guys know, Kevin Holland on this card, so we can talk about that. That'll probably be the focal point. There are 2 championship fights with Merab and Islam. That doesn't matter as much because Kevin Holland's working on that title run. And obviously, Yuri versus Jamal Hill. So starting off, before we get on to the main card, because I do think we should spend a little bit of time talking about each fight since we will only have one episode between now and then. Is there anyone specifically that you want to talk about too as well on here that you're excited to see? I know you're a fan of Nakamura. You've brought him up in the past as well. Also, Johnny Walker is on this card.
Yeah, I think that sums it up with Johnny Walker well. But I mean, it's stacked from top to bottom to the early prelims. Like even the fights in the early prelims are a ton of prospects. Where I'm not huge on them, but Ulan Baikov, Clayton Carpenter are very good, promising flyweight prospects. You have Reese, like you said. Peyton Talbot is gaining a lot of momentum, and then the main card's incredible. And even Renato Moicano, I believe, signed on to this against Dariush, which will be fun for him. And then, yeah, Rinya Nakamura is another one of these Japanese fighter that's making a lot of noise. He's an incredible wrestler, former Olympic wrestler, undefeated still. So that will be a fun fight. But this card is incredibly stacked. And when you look at last year, 297, which was the last bad card on paper, maybe 301, was January 2024, which was 12 months ago. and compare these cards, it's night and day. It's a huge difference. There's a lot of complaints online that the UFC sucks right now. It's in a bad spot, but I mean, on paper at least, it's incredible in my opinion, the fights that are being booked. They're all extremely stacked. And one thing I have noticed is that there's kind of been a lack of women's fights on these cards, not even in a disrespectful way. There's been a record low this year. 2021 was the record high. A lot with COVID, they were pushing it a lot. And maybe that was kind of the feedback of like the UFC sucks, the cards are boring, kind of going down. There is great UFC fighters like Zhang Weili at 312, but that is something to keep in mind. Perez, hope she gets a win here for her. She does have exciting stuff like after the fights mostly, but yeah, Johnny Walker, in my opinion, I'd like to say this much: Johnny Walker, move to heavyweight, please do it. I think his chin. I think obviously he's gonna get brutally knocked out at heavyweight. His career will be over, but he's in a terrible spot right now. I don't think he can contend anymore. Like let's say he somehow wins, like Pereira. Pereira would murder Johnny Walker right now. I don't want to see that, but all these fat heavyweights, Johnny Walker could easily be like a top five guy right now if he wanted to. But yeah, Jailton Almeida, I'm a huge fan of. People call him boring, but he's an incredible grappler that doesn't give up any bad decisions. But we'll go back. Yeah, starting with the main card, I'll go back to you because I know you like someone that he can't afford to lose, Ronaldo Moicano.
Yeah, I know. We talked a lot about him specifically towards the beginning of this year as well. Obviously, an older guy. He's had a few different kind of almost arcs in his career, moving between weight classes as well. And for a lot of the maybe newer UFC fans right now, especially some people that have seen him on this run right now that he's been on, he's been great. But if I were to tell, a lot of these younger or newer UFC fans, I guess, that he fought Jose Aldo in 2019, you'd be very surprised. But I mean, that's what I'm saying here. He's had a lot of different arcs, moving up. He's been a lot better since he's moved up. That's for sure. I know we talked about him at the beginning of the year as well, because when he was going up against Drew Dober, and this is now going to be his fifth fight in less than 12 months in January. And what a run that he's been on. He did have a grappling fight in there as well, but I guess this will be his fourth official UFC fight within 12 months, going up against guys like Drew Dober, Jalen Turner, BSD, and now Beneil Dariush, who I know you're a fan of as well. You've talked about him before. Maybe not anymore, but I think at some point you were on the hype train. But I mean, that fight against BSD, he was a pretty heavy favorite underdog, pretty heavy underdog, and he went out there and absolutely destroyed him. Doctor stoppage, absolutely fantastic ground and pound in that fight, and he's moving his way up. Maybe he'll get that money fight with Paddy Pimblett going forward in the future, but I mean, Moicano, like you said, he can't afford to lose, and I don't think he loses this fight either as well. I think he is in a spot right now where if we're talking about plot armor, Moicano is in that S tier of UFC plot armor right now.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I mean, Darius, like, there was a point in time last year, I will admit it. I thought he was going to be good, title contender level, I'd even say. He was on an 8-fight win streak, a ton of bonuses in there, but then Oliveira Sarukin totally ended that. But those are his only two losses against very talented guys. But I still love this fight for Moicano. It would be great for both of them. They're both a little older. And they're both, yeah, as you said, Moicano's plot armor has been crazy. Like BSD had a ton of steam. I had him steamrolling Moicano. I thought he would dominate him. And Moicano made quick work, destroyed his face. And even his antics outside, he's a very funny guy. So I love when they reward guys who are active, who bring money to the company, money to himself. He tells everyone to bet on him, but he's a very exciting guy. It's a very exciting fight. I cannot wait to see that fight. Honestly, either way, Moicano will probably go into it as the favorite, I would guess, with all the momentum he's built up, but that would be a banger. And then moving on to the people's champ, the real main event, Kevin Holland versus RDR. RDR is a guy we've both mentioned, watching him through one. He was a double champ there. He kind of ended on a slight losing streak, and then I think it was time for him to make the switch over to the UFC. But he hasn't looked incredible. He had his debut against Gerald Meerschaert, which once again, absolute gatekeeper, Neil Magny levels of gatekeeping, and he struggled. He looked striking wise, absolutely terrible. It was very sloppy, very slow. He looked tired. I don't know if he wasn't ready, or if the UFC levels were higher than he expected, but I was shocked with how kind of sloppy and lazy he looked for his UFC debut, where you want to impress the company that just signed you. UFC really doesn't love cross promoting stars. You know, they did it with Asakura because they needed a flyweight, but they want to prove their guys are better than other companies. And RDR wants to prove he's better than these UFC guys. Struggled with the gatekeeper a lot. Kevin Holland, I would never call him a gatekeeper, but he's kind of I don't even know what you call Kevin Holland. I guess the people's champ. He's just like he takes fights. He's so active. He takes anybody. So you do have to respect him for that. But Kevin Holland is a very good grappler, even though he likes to joke around, and he prefers kind of his kung fu style of just striking and slapping people around. He is still a very good grappler, and that's RDR's specialty. So Kevin Holland, when he moves up to middleweight, RDR kind of switches light heavyweight and middleweight. So he's going to look like the lankier guy at first, I'd say, when they clash at 185. But I can't imagine Kevin Holland. Gerald Meerschaert was able to outstrike RDR heavily, and Kevin Holland is a very fast striker. I just can't imagine like MVP outstruck Kevin Holland, but in my mind, maybe I'm wrong about this. I think Kevin Holland dominates on the feet, absolutely dominates. I would even say first round knockout type of levels. Like this could be because we're the two vice presidents of the Kevin Holland fan club, but I really think he's a great striker, and the time is now. This is a big name to beat. Kevin Holland rankings right now. He can start climbing, but I don't think RDR has a chance here unless he can keep this on the ground the entire fight.
Yeah, and I think Kevin Holland's also very underrated with what we've seen before. And that last fight, like I've said before, doesn't count because it was a self-inflicted injury when he was rolling over. I do think, like I said before, I'm very confident if he goes out there and fights Roman Dolidze 9 more times, that one time that Dolidze got lucky in the first fight, that's what happened. Dolidze, I don't think is very, very good. I know he's 14-3. I know people are very excited about him. But you know, his past 2 wins, he beat Anthony Smith, which I know we're both not
Bum.
huge fans of, and Kevin Holland by knockout, which isn't real either. So Kevin Holland working his way back up right now. He's gonna move up. He's gonna win this fight by knockout, like you said. And by the end of 2026. Kevin Holland versus Bo Nickel for the belt is going to be a great fight. You know, on the
Mhm.
feet versus the wrestling, that's going to be great to see. But this is where we see the rise again of Kevin Holland after that last fight that doesn't count. And what we can see after this as well, too. There's a lot of guys in this division who I think he would be able to fight. He wins this fight, he can go up, and this would be the perfect time for him to fight Paulo Costa, since Paulo Costa has fallen off a cliff recently, but still a big enough name as well. And Kevin Holland's still young enough. I think he's going to go out here. I think we can both agree he's going to win by knockout. And he's going to go out there, dominate, and work his way back up as well. He's a company man at the end of the day, so the UFC will definitely take care of him because they've owed him. You know, he's gone out there, fighter of the year, in the past during COVID as well. But now moving on to the third fight before the 2 championship fights, Yuri Prohaska versus Jamal Hill. This has been a very close fight odds wise. I'm pretty sure it's almost even at this point, and I'm gonna give you guys my prediction right now. I am putting almost. I'll put my life savings. I'll put my house. I'll put everything on Yuri to win by knockout. I think I do not. I know you were a very big fan of Jamal Hill coming up all the way. I have never liked him. Seeing that fight against Alex Pereira, which the odds were even in that fight almost to bring you guys back to that. There were people saying that Jamal Hill was going to win that fight. I never forget that. I know a lot of people. I remember every single person that told me Jamal Hill is going to win that fight. So if you are one of them, then you know. But that was the most confident I've ever been in a fight before. I think Yuri's going to go out here and absolutely destroy Jamal Hill. I think he's embarrassed himself more than anyone else in the company right now. Going out there trying to fight Alex Pereira at the PWI. Pereira gave him the gloves. I think that Jamal Hill is, I know he has a very great fight in the past, which we know about, obviously winning the belt, but since then he's embarrassed himself more outside the octagon, bringing all these antics up where saying everything that he comes out with, a new excuse about the UFC 300 fight against Pereira. That just shows you how different these guys are. Pereira has defended his belt multiple times since that fight. And Jamal Hill comes out with a new excuse every week saying that Pereira using his he said that he fought him during a timeout, even though they touched gloves and resumed the fight. So not a big fan of this guy at all, to say the very least. I think Yuri's gonna first round knockout, first punch. Honestly, I'm like mega mortal max on this. Yuri Prohaska is absolutely gonna take his lights out and end Jamal Hill's career and make Jamal Hill into the next Johnny Walker. That's my prediction.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what he's doing. Like I don't know if he's trying to be a heel. I think John Jones is a guy I think he's doing a great job at that. Like
Brian
there's a big
Battle.
difference between these two.
Brian
Yeah,
Battle's the
Brian
perfect
Battle,
heel right
exactly.
now.
Yeah, where you can make mistakes, you can be hated, but you can also play and do it to build up that money. At the end of the day, it does help them as fighters. You get your brand, you get your fans. Brian Battle's doing a great job with it. Yeah, John Jones doing a great job with it, but Jamal Hill is just acting so stupid. I don't know what he's doing. If he heard us saying this, he'd do a 10-minute video about it. He's so sensitive. I can't stand it, but I was a huge fan of him. He lost me as his number one fan. It was incredible watching his rise after Paul Craig snapped his arm in half and he kept fighting. That Glover fight was incredible. I'll say this: I was not one of those people that bet on Jamal Hill against Pereira. Um, Definitely, you were not referring to me, but I thought Pereira should have been a probably 700 favorite in that fight. Shocked by that. And that, yeah, he got dominated. He was the first one to throw after the timeout. He goes up to Pereira last week. Pereira is kind of the man, not to glaze, but he throws the gloves at
He's
him,
the
says they can
guy.
fight right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is, and like he goes up to fight him, and then Pereira says we can fight right now, and then you just don't do it. So and then you go online crying about it. I don't know what he's doing. Like he's lost all of his momentum, all of his fans. He won the belt a year ago, or technically 2 years ago at this point, but he had a ton of momentum in light heavyweight division, a ton of fans. I was a guy that would always bet on him against the stronger, more well known guys, but at this point I don't know what he's doing, but with all of that being said, I do think he is going to be overhated in this fight. Maybe I still have a soft spot for him. There is talent there. He looks very fat and like he doesn't train at all between fights, but I saw the Glover fight, even round one against Alex. I mean, he got dominated in that fight, but he's still very talented. And I think this is a prime example of a fight where people's emotions outside of it are going to affect the odds and the picks going into the fight. I love Yuri. I mean, Alex has made him look bad. He was a very hyped guy before the Alex fights, both losses. I mean, that's his only losses, like that I can think of in his entire career. And I love the matchmaking. I'll say that first. That this is a perfect fight. Two guys that kind of got humbled by Alex. He lowered their stock a lot. This is the time. I cannot wait for the fight. I think this is the fight I'm most excited for, besides Islam on the entire card and the GOAT, Kevin Holland, of course. But Jamal Hill is a very competent striker. So is Yuri. He's very unorthodox. Jamal Hill is just kind of his own type of striking. Neither of them fight like very traditional styles with a ton of defense. So I'm not going to make a pick yet, but Jamal Hill is like kind of piquing my interest. I'm going to be honest with all the hate. I might wait for the odds to get closer to fight night. Jamal Hill will probably act a lot more stupid. The odds will go less and less in his favor. I might even throw a buck or two on him.
Well, I guess we'll put my Mega Max against your dollar or two in this fight. And
Yep.
talking about other guys, some pretty heavy favorites that we can talk about, as these odds have also been released in the main event and co-main event. Cousin Umar minus 238 right now against Marab, and Islam minus 285 against Armin. In my opinion, I think Islam's very good. I think Armin might have a slight chance in this fight. I think Armin's probably the best guy that could beat Islam. If anyone's going to beat him in the division right now, I think Armin's probably the closest guy, skills wise. And like I've said before, I'm not as high on the cousin Umar hype train as I know many other people are. So in my opinion, I think both of these odds are very far apart. I'm not a huge fan of Marab, obviously, after what he did to Sean O'Malley in that fight. But I do think that cousin Umar being minus 240 in this fight and Islam being minus 285, I do think Islam will win. I'm really not sure about Marab versus Umar, though. I guess we'll have to. I don't have an official prediction on that, but what do you think of both of these odds so far? And what do you think about the hot tub incident?
Yeah, so starting with the jacuzzi incident, I mean, it's just typical for them. Umar said he wasn't there. He 100% was probably the one taking the photo.
Mm,
Islam was there. He invited Merab to the jacuzzi, which was very interesting. But I'm not sure why Merab was tweaking out, losing his mind in the press conference. It does seem funny that cousin Umar, I don't think he has any control over his Twitter, but if you look at his Twitter, I believe
yeah.
it's their manager Ali that talks a lot of trash for pretty much their entire team, and
Mm.
he mixes up his own account sometimes. So
Well, some
it's
people like to talk about themselves in the third person.
yeah, yes. Maybe that's just like Umar thing. I think maybe he just talks to himself in the third person and
Yeah,
posts
the
it online that
translation
way.
with the Dagestani and
Exactly.
Russian, it doesn't translate as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, it's a common mistake to make, but the press conference was pretty hilarious. Seeing Merab lose his mind. Islam even was trying to calm him down. But anything to get more emotion and more anger into fights is something I will always support. Uh, True rivalries outside of the octagon make for better fights inside it. And this one, both of these title fights, I've been messing with in my head where I could make strong arguments for both sides. Merab, everyone knows his style. It's just he shoots for 50 takedowns, doesn't do a lot of damage. He wins off decision. Umar is not he's not Khabib. He's a cousin. Maybe in the family that would be enough to marry each other, but in
Mm.
our families it's enough to be pretty different from each other. And he's not at all the same guy as them. He has a lot more striking. He's built a little differently, and he is a bantamweight. He's a smaller guy, but he seems like at first when I went through the fight, I said, Merab's gonna that Umar doesn't have that grappling Khabib does. Merab's gonna take down. He's gonna go for 50 takedowns, have a boring decision win over Umar, and then I kind of wrestled with it in my head where I think Umar might be the perfect defense for Merab, where he has a good enough. He's going to have a great training camp. You already know how the Dagestanis do it, but he might have the perfect defense to Merab's grappling, and then he'll have that striking advantage that Merab just straight up does not have. Obviously, I hope Sean O'Malley would knock out Merab, but guys like Cejudo could drop him, who's shorter than even Umar is, and fatter than Umar is, and more annoying than Umar is. But Umar, I like him a lot. He only has, I think I'm higher on him than you are. His only really big win is that Sandhagen fight, but I still think he earned this fight 100%. Obviously, I would like to see O'Malley fight for that title again, but I think this was the right choice, giving Umar the belt. You got to make it off the top contenders. Umar he dominated Sandhagen. He didn't get uh, dominating finish early, but it was a great fight. And so I think Umar's the right guy for Merab. He'll defend all those takedowns. And personally, I think I'm going to be taking Umar for it. But same thing, the main event, I'm still pretty mixed up on. I'm a huge fan of both guys.
Yeah, like you said, honestly, at this point right now, I think I could make an argument for almost either side. I do want to go back and especially within these next time, I did watch a lot. of Marab going up to that Sean O'Malley fight. I have seen all of Umar's fights, but I really need to go back and kind of look at it a little bit more. A weird moment in one of these fights where we have a Dagestanian guy going into a fight where he's not the wrestler in the fight. So makes it very interesting to look at. Arman, I really think is I think he's very, very good. And like I said, plus 230, Islam minus 285. I think it's a little too far apart for me right now. I think Arman does deserve that. I know some people got upset about his decision over Charles, but he went out there, he got out of two very tight chokes, which I don't think anyone else in the division besides maybe Islam would have got out of those. Those were very tight, and Arman got out. He knows what to do in pretty almost every facet of the game right now. So a very good fighter in his own right as well, and a very good card to start the year as well. After we just saw what this weekend will be the final fight card of the year.
Yeah, and just going to this fight, I love watching Arman fight. That Oliveira fight is a prime example of not a robbery, but a close fight and a close decision where Arman had to pants himself to get out of that choke from the best submission threat in UFC history. But one thing that I think might make a huge difference to the fight is Islam's in his prime right now. He's dominated everyone that's coming his way, besides some random Brazilian 10 years ago somehow. But a lot of these guys, like Khabib and Islam, have looked unbeatable. They look incredible. You can't out wrestle them. They outstrike you because you're scared of the takedown threat, and there's no way you can beat them. But something I saw even from guys like Dustin Poirier, and I think the big difference here is going to be in Sarukin, is where these Dagestanis, it's kind of the fear factor that plays into it. That you're scared of their name, you're scared of their, even their last name and their legacy with their record. Most of them are undefeated, even though they fight cans until they get to the UFC. Islam's like the rare Dagestani that has a loss. Most of them are undefeated their entire career and retire that way. But I think the decision maker that would make me pick Arman is that he doesn't care about any of that. I feel like even it's coming from the McGregor fight, where kind of the like Western fighters, there's a fear around these Dagestanis that they can choke you out, they can out wrestle you. And the Conor fight showed it, where I think Conor was very nervous going into that fight. He got choked out. He almost got his neck broken if he didn't tap. He probably would have. And I think Arman, he's Armenian. It's in the same like region near Dagestan. They both trained for the fight a few weeks ago. They were a few miles apart, training in the mountains together, in completely separate camps. So one thing I'd like to see a lot is you saw it late with Dustin Poirier, where he kind of lost that like fear of getting taken down. Dustin, that was peak like Gilly Gang Dustin, where he's saying like, you know what, like I'm the underdog here. I'm probably not the better guy than Islam, but I'm just gonna go out swinging. And he hurt Islam very bad. He hurt him more than a lot of people have in a long time. So I think a huge thing Arman can do here is show no fear, which I don't think he will. And I think he might even implement some striking here, where he won't be scared of that takedown threat, which will open up the striking. And I think we could see an upset here. I really do. Against peak Islam, Islam to me is undebatably the pound for pound number one guy above Jones, above Topuria. I think he's just incredible watching him dominate Volk that way, who was the number one guy. But I don't know. I think we might see a massive upset with the Islam fight because Arman might not be afraid of him. He's just going to go out swinging. I hope it's not a boring fight that Islam just takes. He's already beat Arman that way, decision wrestling. But I hope someone needs to get in his head, like don't be afraid of these guys. Go out swinging. Go out with your wrestling. And I think once you break down that the shield they built up with their last name, with their records, that they're really not that strong on the inside. Like Poirier hurt him pretty bad in that fight. He wasn't close to winning, but he showed that you can beat these guys. Arman is probably the best guy that has a chance to do it in a little while, I'd say.
Yeah, I think we can both agree that's going to be definitely a very good main event, especially to start the year. But talking about the end of this year, since that pay-per-view is not going to be for another month, we do have an episode coming out in about 2 or 3 weeks, depending on exactly when we could get it done. But it will be coming out before the end of the year with our official end of the year awards throughout almost every single category you guys could think of, fighter of the year, fight of the year, submission, knockout of the year, everything like that. So if there's anything you guys want to see specifically as a category, make sure to leave that down below. And that'll be the next time that we see you guys before the end of the year officially.
Yeah, and we're gonna have, yeah, as you said, pretty much everything you can think of, but it's gonna be like fight of the year, submission of the year, prospects, all the things that you guys want to see, and something that we can look upon in the future too, to see if they age well, whatnot, and something we could continue to do on an annual basis. But that will be by the end of the year for those awards, and then next time you'll see us will be after UFC 311, where Kevin Holland will be on the path, perfectly on pace for 2026 middleweight champion of the world. So check out Banning at Next Man Up MMA, and we will see you then.
Have a good one, guys.